And now finally, we're going to play from the 7th degree of the scale, B, D, F, and A. Now that's a minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio, but if you remember correctly, whenever we're playing root and guide tone voicings, we have no fifth, so we're just going to use a minor 7 root and guide tone voicing to achieve the chord that's related to this mode. That's 1, flat 3 and flat 7. And the mode we're going to associate with this, the 7th degree of the C major scale, is going to be called B Locrian. Okay, so now that we understand where these 7 chords and their associated modes come from, we want to try and put them into practice. In my experience, the main and most common problem to hinder guitar players in their understanding of the modes is the misconception that the mode you hear is dictated by the scale shape you play, or rather the note of the scale on which you start. The reason for this, in my opinion, is that many guitarists practice and play outside of a group setting with no chordal accompaniment. So when they play a particular scale shape, say a box shape of C major like we just played, but starting on D, then they hear every note of the scale in relation to this D. So let me give you an example of how that sounds. Here's our box shape. Now, because I started it on C, we heard everything in relation to C, which gives us the sound of a C major arpeggio. If I start on D, D then effectively becomes the root of the scale, and when there's no chord behind the scale, our ear builds up an impression of all the notes around the D, and we hear a D minor 7 arpeggio, or another way to put it, the sound of D Dorian, which is basically a D minor 7 chord sound. However, as soon as accompaniment is introduced, this can change completely. So let's use a practical situation to explain this. Let's say, for example, we have 2 guitarists. If guitarist 1 plays the C major scale for 1 octave from D to D, in the situation where there's no accompaniment, this would give the illusion of D Dorian, like we just heard. However, if we were to introduce a second guitarist whose job it is to accompany guitarist 1 with chords from the key of C major, the mode we're going to hear then is dictated by the chord that guitarist 2 plays behind guitarist 1 who's just playing notes from the C major scale. So for example, if the first guitarist just playing notes from the C major scale is accompanied by another guitarist playing a C major chord, a C major 7 chord behind him, the mode we hear is going to be the mode associated with this one chord, and that's called C Ionian. So our ears hear all the single notes in relation to the foundation that the chord gives, regardless of what order the notes are played in, or where the solo line starts or finishes in the scale. In the same way, if guitarist 1 was playing notes just from the C major scale, and guitarist 2 played a D minor 7 or a D minor chord behind that, we'd hear the mode associated with the 2 chord, and that's going to be D Dorian. So once again, our ears hear all the single notes in relation to that chord. It doesn't matter what order the notes are played in, or where the solo starts or finishes in the scale. And to give one final example, if guitarist 1 was playing the notes of the C major scale and guitarist 2 was to play an F major 7 chord behind that, we would hear the mode associated with this 4 chord, which would be called F Lydian. So our ears would be, the mode we hear would be dictated by the foundation provided by the chord. It wouldn't matter what guitarist 1 did, as long as he was playing notes only from the C major scale. So you could apply that same thinking to any mode of the C major scale just by playing the associated chord behind the soloist. You can create the mode as long as the soloist keeps playing from the C major scale. So to define that, we could say that the mode you hear is determined by the harmonic environment in which a particular scale is performed. In other words, the chord played behind the scale or lick determines the mode heard by the listener. So let's now look at this from another perspective by saying how these modes can be achieved playing outside the key of C major. So for example, on a G minor 7, we would usually play G Dorian. Dorian is obviously the second mode of the F major scale. Therefore, in order to achieve the note, or in order to achieve the notes required to hear G Dorian, we play the F major scale over a G minor 7 chord. To give another example, if we have an F7 resolving to a B flat major 7, we generally play F mixolydian over the F7 chord. F mixolydian is the fifth mode in the key of B flat major. Therefore, to achieve this mode, we play the notes of the B flat major scale over an F7 chord.